Let me rattle through 3 very quick things that are going to help us engage with this whole book of Exodus. The first one's about my mum. I didn't realise you were going to be here this morning. So apologies in advance. My mum got a new phone recently. She's gone from iPhone to non-iPhone. And if you've been part of the Apple cult, you'll know how hard that is, all right? Moving away from that. But one of the things Mum wanted to do when she moved from her phone to phone was transfer some of the text messages from her old phone to the new phone. Now, I've just gone from smartphone to dumb phone, right? It's useless. And that's kind of the point. And it was to declutter and to get rid of distractions and to detox a little bit. And so I could go, well, why would you want to transfer stuff over? Surely you want to shed stuff. But the reason Mum wanted to transfer stuff over was because she had text messages on her own phone, particularly some from her little sister, Christine, who passed away from cancer in 2014. They were not things to declutter. They were not just text messages to read and then to disregard. Those messages embodied their relationship. They're not just words, they're precious. They're not just texts that you read and then delete. They are texts that you read and you reread and you reread and reread and reread. Now, what you're about to read with us in the book of Exodus is not just text for you to read and then to discard. It is a word that comes from God that embodies the relationship He has with His people. And this book has been read and reread and read again for people for thousands of years. And it has changed lives. It has redeemed slaves. It has started movements. It has transformed history. Most importantly, it has introduced people to God. This is a letter where God is introducing Himself to you. This is God initiating a relationship with you. Not just so that you would know of Him, but that you would know Him. Not just so that it's words on a page, not so that you just read it, but that you would begin and grow to love this because it is from Him. It embodies that relationship. Does that make sense? Okay, so not just text to disregard. A love thing, embodying relationship. Second thing. Sarah and I recently finished 2 series of a show on Netflix. It was the darkest, most twisted, most disturbing thing I have ever watched in my life. Particularly the end of series 2 was the most unsettling, nightmare-inducing, sweat-giving, uncomfortable TV viewing I've ever had in my path. Don't watch it. It's called Marcella. Anyone see that? Do not watch it, alright? Don't watch it. Now, it's one of those kind of police drama, whodunit type things. But as well as the darkness, the kind of sickness of it, it was one of the most irritating things I've ever watched. So in the whodunit, the whole point is kind of to find out who done it, obviously. But they introduce so many other characters, so many plot twists, so many changes in the story, that when it comes to the end of the series and there's that moment of the big reveal, people who have been massively significant characters turn out to have nothing to do with the plot. The most irritating thing in the world. People that you've said, it was definitely him. He is definitely this sick, twisted, paedophile, murdering psychopath. It's him. It turns out it's got nothing to do with him. And they're just left hanging. About 10 different main characters. You find nothing out about them. Not even in the next series. Irritating. Now, the book of Exodus is the exact opposite of that. Now, it's going to be dark. Very dark in places. However, every moment, every movement, every scene, every character, every dialogue, every word has been carefully selected, detailed, and narrated for a very specific purpose. There are no red herrings. There are no wasted characters. No things left hanging. Everything is put here for a specific reason. This is God making Himself known so that you would know Him. It is a story that's written down by Moses. We'll meet him later. But it's a story written by him of a story directed by God. It's got two halves. First half of the book, redeeming his people from slavery. Second half of the book, bringing those people to himself. There's no wasted characters, no wasted words, no distractions. Everything very deliberate so that you would come to see this as someone you can know, a word that you will begin to love. That makes sense? Third thing. Deja vu. You're aware of deja vu? I don't have a Scooby what it translates as. I don't really know how to spell it, but I know what it is. What is deja vu? Oh, I've been here before. You had that feeling?
Already seen.
Yeah, something that is that what it translates as? It's French, right? I don't even know what thank you is in French. I was going to say thank you. What was it? Merci. I did German at school. Where are we? Deja vu. This book is deliberately full of deja vu. You will constantly think, have we not heard this before? Now, some of that will come from, if you were with us in Genesis last year. There's things that seem to reoccur in deja vu moments from Genesis. Some of it will come within the book as types of stories and events happen again and again and again. Some of it will come as you read the rest of the Bible and you hear a deja vu from Exodus later on. A lot of it will come as you see some of the stuff from Exodus finding it bigger and better in the person of Jesus, and we'll see that today. But I hope some of it will come as there's a sense of deja vu where you see that this story in Exodus begins to kind of strike a chord in your own experience of life. This is a sense of deja vu that's deliberate to persuade you that not only does this book of Exodus make sense of your story, but also that it's Jesus that makes sense of the book of Exodus. This is a repeating story, a repeating redemption story that wants to repeat in your story. That makes sense? Okay, so let's read. Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to try and get through 2 chapters this morning. We'll see how we go. We'll kind of read a bit, comment a bit, and then we'll keep going. So Exodus 1 verse 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin. Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now the story so far in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, has followed Adam, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and ended with this guy, Joseph. Now, at one point, Joseph was a prisoner in Egypt to Pharaoh. By the end of the story, he is Pharaoh's right-hand man in Egypt, saving the entire nation. He basically goes from slave to savior, prisoner to prime minister. And he'd been hated by his brothers, who sold him into slavery with the very intent of harming him. But by God's positioning, he ends up saving his brothers, bringing them to the safety and the affluence of Egypt, and giving them a place to live in the very best of the land. And so it ends up in Genesis, the start of Exodus, with Joseph, his 11 brothers, in Egypt, with their families, numbering how many? 70. That is the totality, the sum of God's people at the end of Genesis. 70 people. Look what happens next, verse 6. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were, and notice the language here, exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly. They increased in numbers and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Now, if you were with us for Genesis last year, you should be hearing some deja vu language. Genesis started with them in Eden. We're now in Egypt. But in Eden, the blessing of God for the business of humanity, God said, was to go forth and multiply, to increase in number and fill the earth. What are we told at the start of Exodus? God's people are being fruitful, multiplying, increasing in number, and filling the earth. The point is, what God commanded and blessed in Eden is now happening in Egypt. Exodus starts as Genesis starts. And God sees it as a good thing. It is a blessing. God's people are doing what God wanted his people to do. But it's more than that. God is fulfilling what he promised to do. Genesis chapter 12. He calls a guy called Abraham. He speaks to Abraham and his wife. They're in their 90s. They're old. But he makes a promise to this old couple, a barren couple, a childless couple. He says, you're going to have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that are numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the shore. Now, by the end of Genesis, start of Exodus, what do you have? From this couple, from this old guy, this old woman, he's past it, her womb is as good as dead. And yet from this couple and that womb, God has brought descendants that have turned into a nation that are described in Exodus 1 verse 7, so numerous that the land was filled. Here's the note that Exodus starts on. You can bank your trust in the promises of God. Joseph, you may go into a prison in Egypt, but trust the promises of God. I'm going to bring you and save Egypt. Moses, Pharaoh's going to kill you or try and kill you a couple of times, but I'm going to use you to save my people. You can trust in the promises of God. Israel, you're going to be slaves in Egypt, but Moses is going to bring you out. You can trust in the promises of God. Christian, you're going to go through trouble and suffering, but you can bank your trust in the promises of God. He delivers on his words. Jesus has promised, I'll build my church. The gates of hell won't prevail against us. Now, we're probably not even 70 in this room. But 2 years ago, we were barely 16. You can bank your trust in the promises of God. Let's keep reading. Verse 8. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they'll become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So, put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labour, and build Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. So, new king spells a new era for God's people in Egypt, and not in a good way. This new Pharaoh doesn't remember Joseph. The relationship forgotten, the rescue forgotten. And where God sees the increasing and the multiplying as a blessing, this new Pharaoh sees the increasing and the multiplying as a curse. And as so often in human history, when someone in power has greed, fear, and a lust for control, it overspills into slavery and oppression. This new king, new Pharaoh, sets himself up as anti-God and the enemy of God's people. Again, you should be, if you're with us in Genesis, hearing little deja vu things. Remember, end of Genesis 3, God makes a promise to Eve that there will be an unending struggle between her offspring and the offspring of Satan. He will strike your heel, but your offspring will crush his head. Here is that battle going on. The offspring of Satan in Pharaoh. The offspring of Eve in the people of God. What's going to happen? Keep going. Verse 12. But the more they, that's God's people, were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labour in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the field. In all their harsh labour, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew woman during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live. Now you should notice this cycle that goes on there, right? So, the Egyptians oppress God's people more and more. What happens to God's people though? They grow more and more. So the Egyptians grow in fear, dread of the Israelites more and more. So what do they decide to do? Oppress them more and more. But then what happens? They grow more and more. Now, if the Egyptians just stepped back, they would realize that what they are doing is not working. If they just stepped back and said, hang on, What have the Israelites been like when they've been in our city? Actually, they were placed here and rescued us. They saved us from 7 years of famine. When we were with them, they were for our good, and now we've oppressed them, they're increasing even more. Maybe we should stop oppressing them. Maybe they're not actually here to do us harm. Maybe they're here for our good. Now, that's actually going to be a massive theme in the book of Exodus. God blesses his people so that they can be a blessing to the world. But this king, this Pharaoh, is so hell-bent on oppression and slavery, he can't see it. He's blind, his heart's hard. He just keeps doing the same thing, regardless of the result. Now, some of us are not dissimilar to that. Constantly doing the same things, expecting a better result, but it's just making our lives worse. I hope that this book will wake you up and say, oh, actually, there is another way. But anyway, Pharaoh doesn't see it, and he goes from just ruthless slavery to a gender-selective infanticide. Probably thinking, okay, if we rape the Israelite women, we can infiltrate their lineage, and if we destroy the Israelite baby boys, we can terminate their lineage. Start. Let's keep reading verse 17. These midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to. They let the boys live. You've got to love these women who stick it to Pharaoh. He doesn't remember Joseph. He's got no regard for Joseph's God. But these midwives probably knew the Joseph story. And so they had come to worship and fear Joseph's God. And so though commanded by their local king to destroy the Israelite baby boys, they remember the Israelite man that came to Egypt and saved Egypt from famine. And so they know from first-hand experience that God's power is better and bigger than Pharaoh's power, and they probably just knew instinctively as midwives that life is better than death. Now it's worth knowing here, another deja vu thing that's going to come up a lot in the Bible is that when God is going to do something noteworthy and new, he often uses seemingly insignificant women. Now we can name Sarah, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Hannah, Esther, Elizabeth, Mary, Mary Magdalene. Time and time again in the Bible, you're going to hear this deja vu thing of women particularly given birth. Because with new birth comes new hope. With new birth comes a new life. And so significant here that at the start of Exodus, in the midst of all this darkness of slavery, the heroes are midwives, giving birth to hope. And in this book of no insignificant details, isn't it a beautiful thing that he records the names of these two midwives? They're called Shipra and Puah in verse 15. We don't get to know the name of the Pharaoh. The most powerful man in the land is nameless in this book. But we know these women's names. They're remembered for the rest of forever. What's the point? If you fear God wherever you are, you can serve God's purposes wherever you are. You don't have to be in ministry to do ministry. Fear God. God will use you wherever you are. Midwife, accountant, stay-at-home mum, retired policeman, whoever you are. Fear God as a Christian. God will use you in his massive purposes for the world. Right, keep going. Verse 18. Then the king of Egypt summoned these midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all the people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile. But let every girl live. Now, just pause again briefly. Deja vu. We've just been through the Christmas narrative. And we've just read of another king. who, driven by fear and by greed and a lust for control, puts out another hit on all the baby boys in a little place called Bethlehem. But again, a boy is going to survive, and a boy is going to be used to set God's people free. See how this is going to repeat? Amazing how the Bible fits together. We'll see more of that. So let's keep going. Verse 1, chapter 2. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. So we're going from kind of all the Israelite women, all the Israelite babies, down to one pregnant mum and one little boy. So second half of verse 2. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, look in verse 3. After the word basket, there's a little word B. You see that little letter B? It sends you down to the bottom of the page. What does it say at the bottom of the page? The word for basket can also mean ark. Deja vu. I've heard of an ark in the Bible before. Remember that guy Noah in Genesis chapter 6? He built an ark. Noah's ark was kind of patted in to make it waterproof by using bitumen and same thing that's used here. Interesting. So here's a little baby boy that is going to be preserved through water by being placed in an ark. Interesting. Keep going. We don't have time to go on all this, but it's fascinating, isn't it? Verse 5. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket with reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Now you have got to love the irony and how it's stuck to Pharaoh here. The very baby, Israelite baby, that Pharaoh was bent on destroying, he now ends up having to pay a nanny to raise from his own wallet. You've got to love that. Pharaoh pays the bills, and the mum gets paid to raise her own child. A dream. However, the mum doesn't get to name him. She's named by Pharaoh's daughter. And she names him Moses. What did Moses mean? Told us at the end of that section. I drew him out of the water. The princess gives the name, saved through water. I drew him out of the water. The princess gives the name, but it is God that stands behind the meaning. His name is a little promise, a preview of what is to come for all of God's people. Moses was saved through water, drawn out of the water, and saved from the ravenous, murderous intent of Pharaoh. That's a picture of what is going to happen for all of God's people. Israel will be drawn out of Egypt, drawn out through the waters of the Red Sea, preserved from the ravenous, slavish anger of the next Pharaoh. Here is the nation's story in one man's name. We'll be saved through water just like him. Isn't that amazing? Should make you think of another baby boy who was given a name that meant Saviour. Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. It's actually where the book Exodus gets its name from. It means the exit, the deliverance, the drawing out of Egypt. The whole point is God, in this love message so that you would know him, is to say to you that in your slavery, not to any person necessarily, but the slavery to sin, that the whole point of this book is you would know God as your rescuer, the one who will draw you out through the waters of baptism so that you would be brought out of slavery to himself. We need to keep on going. Let's just go. Verse 11. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." Then Pharaoh heard of this. He tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. So we've gone from baby Moses 40 years later to Moses an adult. He's grown up in the luxury of Pharaoh's house. But his own people have been living in slavery. And in these next few episodes, we're going to get a little insight into the kind of leader that Moses is going to be. Aspects of his character that God is going to use, and definite aspects of his character that God is going to have to change. You see here, he's going to become one of the most significant people in the Bible, but he's a bloke, a human being, as flawed as you and me. In this first episode, in some ways, he acts more like Pharaoh than anyone else here. He's a ruthless murderer. But in other ways, there is something deja vu, like repeating, like going on. Here's a prince stepping down from a palace to act on behalf of the oppressed. That should make you think of other stuff. Actually, what this little episode of him stepping in to save an Israelite from an Egyptian is actually a little preview and promise again of what is going to happen. Moses, soon, another 40 years, is going to see God's people oppressed once more. He's going to step down once more. He's going to act on behalf of the oppressed once more. He's going to see Egyptians killed once more, and he's going to have to flee east once more. See, in Moses' early days is a little preview for God's people of what God is going to do to rescue them in the future. By no means is he the leader God's people need him to be, and by no means yet is he the leader God needs him to be. But he's being shaped. And Pharaoh, who wanted him dead as a baby, now wants him dead as an adopted grandson. Verse 16, I'm going. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away. But Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "Where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." Now this is more than Moses' kind of like How I Met Your Mother story. This is again a preview of what's going to come. What's the story? These women, oppressed by some shepherds, Moses steps in, saves them, and then does what for them? Gives them and their flock. Anyone listening? Water. It's a preview of what Moses is going to do again for all God's people. He's going to step in when they are being oppressed. He's going to save them by God's power, and then by God's same power is going to sustain them by drawing water from a rock. Here is God's rescuer going to save and sustain his people, bringing them out of slavery to himself. You need to watch this space, because their slavery is not the end of the story. God's sending a rescuer. And notice verse 23, next verse. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. That is a massively significant statement. This king, who has been hell-bent on the deaths of others, dies. This king who has struck the heel of God's people is crushed. The point is this: although earthly rulers may determine the circumstances of God's people, earthly rulers will not define the destiny of God's people. Twice he tried to kill the one that will be God's rescuer to save his people, but twice he's proved utterly impotent. It's interesting, if you think about how Genesis started and how Exodus started, there's another kind of connection. Genesis 3, end of it. Genesis begins by God's people becoming, because of their sinfulness, dying as God's enemies. So Genesis starts, God's people, because of their sinfulness, dying as his enemies. Exodus, the second book of the Bible, starts with God's people as slaves, but with their enemy dying. You see the move? They're the sinners who are promised death, but at the start of Exodus, they are the slaves and their oppressor dies. What's the point? We're on a movement, we're on a journey from death to life, from slavery to freedom, from hell to heaven, from under an oppressor to with God himself. Where sin has brought death and sin has brought slavery, Exodus is the promise that through the death of God's Son, he is going to rescue and redeem his people so that death will die, sin will be crucified, and he doesn't just lead an Exodus out of Egypt, but he is going to lead an Exodus out of death and hell. God's on a rescue plan, and no earthly king is going to thwart it. The Exodus is coming. You better get on that train. Let's finish off. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning. And he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Now, prayer is sometimes nothing more than a groan. Prayer is something that God hears on his heavenly throne, and we're told he hears, he remembers, he sees, and concern's a weak word. A better word is he knows. He knows them. Remembers his promises, remembers his grace, remembers his commitment to them. He remembers his relationship. God is not like the Pharaoh who comes along and Joseph meant nothing to him. God is not like that. God is the one to his people mean everything to him. His promises mean everything to him. His promises to redeem them and bring them to himself means everything. And when he hears their groaning, he sees, he hears, he remembers, and he knows. His word to you this morning communicates his love to you. The fact that there's no insignificant details means that there are no unheard, no overlooked groans. And if he hears their groans, the deja vu repeating thing is that he hears yours. And you just need to wait and see what he is going to do for his groaning people in this book of Exodus. He'll redeem and he'll bring you to himself.